Your kid's brain is not the same species as yours. Not metaphorically, structurally. If you were born before 2010, you learned the internet. You sat down, you dialed up, you waited for a page to load, and somewhere in that waiting, your brain built a bridge between boredom and patience. Gen Alpha never built that bridge. They were handed a fully loaded nervous system's worth of stimulation before they could hold their own head up. And that one difference, stimulation from birth instead of stimulation added later, is quietly rewriting how an entire generation thinks, feels, and connects. This isn't a video about screen time being bad. You've heard that video. Everyone's made that video. This is about what actually happens inside a developing brain when the first 5 years of life, the years that build the entire architecture for attention and emotion and identity, are shaped by an algorithm instead of a room. So,
Let's take a look at the
here's
three
what
real
we're doing.
differences that really
Three
matter
real
when we consider
differences,
these
not
concepts.
opinions, not moral panic, just the developmental psychology of what it means to be the first generation raised inside the feed instead of introduced to it later. Stick around for the third one because it's the one nobody's talking about and it might be the one that matters most. Let's start with attention because it's the most visible and the most misunderstood. Millennials and older Gen Z grew up with dead air. You'd wait for a show to come on. You'd be bored in a car with nothing but a window. Boredom, it turns out, isn't a glitch in a developing brain, it's a feature. Neuroscientists have found that boredom activates the brain's default mode network, the same system responsible for imagination, self-reflection, and problem solving. A bored kid isn't a broken kid. A bored kid is a kid whose brain is quietly teaching itself how to generate its own entertainment, which is the exact same skill that later becomes creativity, patience, and the ability to sit with a hard problem until it cracks open. Gen Alpha doesn't get that gap. The moment stimulation drops, a screen fills it, and a brain that never practices sitting in the gap never builds the muscle for it. This isn't willpower, it's wiring. Attention isn't just about how long you can focus. It's about your brain's baseline expectation for how often the world is supposed to reward you. If that baseline gets set at every 6 to 8 seconds, which is roughly the cut rate of the short form content this generation has been swimming in since toddlerhood, then a classroom lecture, a full conversation, even a movie without jump cuts starts to feel like it's broken, not boring. Broken, like something's wrong with it because nothing is happening. That's difference number one. Attention isn't shrinking, it's being trained to expect a different rhythm entirely, and that rhythm was never designed by a parent or a teacher. It was designed by an engagement algorithm optimizing for watch time, not development. Here's where it gets more interesting though, because attention is the easy one, the one people already suspect. The second difference is about something most people haven't even thought to ask about: where Gen Alpha's brain learns what a relationship is. For every generation before this one, social development had a bottleneck built in. You could only have so many friends because friendship took proximity and time and the awkward, effortful process of reading another human's face in real time. Reading a face is not automatic. It's a skill your brain builds through thousands of small, unglamorous repetitions, misreading someone, getting corrected, misreading someone again, slowly calibrating a system called social cognition that lives largely in a brain region called the prefrontal cortex, the part that doesn't finish developing until your mid 20s. Gen Alpha is building that same system, but a huge percentage of the reps aren't coming from faces. They're coming from screens, from AI companions, from parasocial relationships with creators who talk directly into a camera as if they're talking directly to you. And here's the part that should actually give you pause. Some of Gen Alpha's earliest, most repeated social relationships are with entities that never get tired, never get annoyed, never have a bad day, and never require the child to do the hard work of managing someone else's needs. An AI chatbot doesn't need you to read its face because it doesn't have one. It just responds. That sounds convenient. Developmentally, it's a problem because the friction is the point, the awkward pause, the friend who doesn't text back right away, the moment you have to sit with someone else's disappointment. That friction is where empathy gets built, rep by uncomfortable rep. A generation getting a meaningful share of its early relational reps from something frictionless isn't necessarily going to be less kind, but it may genuinely be less practiced at tolerating the discomfort that real relationships require because the nervous system never had to. That's difference number two, and it connects directly to the third one, the one I said mattered most. The third difference is about identity, and specifically about where the sense of self gets built. Every generation forms identity partly through mirrors, meaning other people reflecting back who you are. Older generations got that mirror from a small circle. Parents, a handful of friends, maybe a teacher who said the right thing at the right moment. The circle was small, but it was stable, and stability matters because a developing sense of self needs a consistent signal to calibrate against. Gen Alpha's mirror is an algorithm and it isn't stable. It's personalized, meaning it shows each child a slightly different reflection based on what keeps them watching, not what's true or healthy. A child who lingers half a second longer on videos about being anxious gets shown more anxiety content. A child who lingers on videos about being unlovable gets shown more of that too. The system isn't trying to hurt anyone, it's optimizing for attention, and it has learned that identity based content that tells a kid something specific about who they are, is extremely good at holding attention, which means an entire generation is forming its sense of self, partly through a feedback loop that was built to maximize watch time, not psychological health. This is where you start to see something genuinely new happening in the research. Doctors are describing kids who arrive with a fully formed vocabulary for conditions they were never diagnosed with: anxious attachment, sensory processing issues, neurodivergence, sometimes accurate, sometimes not, but arriving pre labeled because the algorithm handed them the label before a professional ever got the chance to. Identity used to be discovered slowly through lived experience. For a meaningful slice of Gen Alpha, identity is being suggested to them early, repeatedly, and by a system with no clinical training and no accountability. So put those three together, and you're not looking at a generation that's simply on their phones too much. You're looking at a generation whose baseline for attention, whose early training in relationships, and whose emerging sense of self are all being shaped by the same source. And that source was never built with a child's development in mind. It was built to hold attention. Full stop. Now, here's the part that actually matters because this isn't a doom video, and doom videos don't help anyone. The same neuroplasticity that made this rewiring possible is the reason it isn't permanent. The developing brain that adapts to constant stimulation is the same brain that can adapt back if the environment changes. Boredom can be reintroduced, face to face friction can be reintroduced, slow, unoptimized identity formation, the kind that comes from real conversations instead of a feed, can be reintroduced. None of this requires deleting technology. It requires understanding that a developing brain treats its environment as instructions. And right now, a huge part of that environment is handing out instructions nobody chose on purpose. That's really the whole point of this channel, honestly. Not fear, understanding. Because the moment you understand why a brain is doing what it's doing, you stop treating the symptom and start addressing the actual cause, whether that's your own brain or someone you're raising. If this connected some dots for you, there's a video right up here that goes deeper into how short form content specifically rewires the dopamine system, which is the mechanism behind everything you just heard. Watch that one next, and you'll understand not just what's happening to this generation's attention, but exactly why it's so hard to reverse once it sets in.